Now, many of you will already know that NIO, not only are they selling their cars in China, but they are also selling their cars in Europe. Yesterday, we were discussing about how NIO is doing in Europe, which, as per what we said yesterday, I don't think NIO is doing as per what they expected. But one thing I like about NIO is, of course, their confidence about Europe or the countries in Europe. Because, ladies and gents, NIO continues expanding. NIO continues launching new NIO houses. In fact, ladies and gents, NIO today they've opened their very big guest NIO house in Europe, in Netherlands, which is something that shows you that NIO still got confidence in Europe. Though NIO might not be selling as per what they expected, but they still believe that they can still do really well in Europe, which is something that is pretty exciting. I mean, NIO, ladies and gents, you will know that they have their presence into 5 European countries, and they've not only been selling car but also deploying their technology, meaning that even their battery swapping stations, because I think to date NIO has over 40 battery swapping stations in Europe, which is something that is pretty exciting because it is making the people of Europe also enjoy battery swap, those that have subscribed to bus. So out of the actual 43 numbers of battery swapping stations they have in Europe, 15 of these are in Germany, which is something that is pretty exciting. Now you will know that, as we just said, the NIO opening the largest of course NIO house in Netherlands just shows you of how confident NIO is still about Europe. Yes, we know that there are uncertainties about the Europe tariffs when it comes to the Chinese automakers, but NIO, ladies and gents, regardless of this, they are still confident, still building, still growing in Europe, which is something that is pretty exciting. Now, this new NIO house that NIO just opened, or the largest NIO house that NIO just opened today, it is the 7th in Europe, which is something that, of course, like I said, it is pretty exciting because NIO continues, of course, with their plan, deploying their plan of growing in Europe. Yes, the sales might not be that good or what we expect, but NIO is still confident about Europe. I mean, the CEO, I think today, was being interviewed, and he indicated that if the sales grow to a place where they would really like, then they don't see a problem of them partnering with a European companies to build their factory or their production factory in Europe, which is something that shows you that NIO, ladies and gents, they do really got good plans about Europe, and all that it will take for NIO to open a production factory in Europe will just be the sales or the numbers how as they come, which is something that is of course pretty exciting. The uncertainties about the subsidies on Chinese EVs from EU or Europe, NIO continues their plans of growing in Europe, which is something that is pretty exciting. I mean, one of the things about the subsidies or these subsidies is that some of the German or big German automakers have been sending out messages, reports to, of course, the EU, saying that they should not impose the tariffs or serious tariffs or much more tariffs into Chinese EV because it could backfire. This is one of the things that we've been seeing, of course, Mercedes-Benz saying, some of the executives of Mercedes-Benz saying, some of the executives of other German automakers saying, and that is to say, EU must never play the games of increasing tariffs in order to restrict the Chinese cars coming into EU, because they realize that that will backfire. Yes, for a country like US that have increased the tariffs to 100% now, in the long run this thing will head back the US, because guess what, there are some companies, in fact Tesla, ladies and gents, it is selling their cars in China, which that, ladies and gents, though China is not retaliate as yet, but in the near future or in the long term it will come and bite back the US, which I think it is good for some of the EU big players advising EU not to do that, because they realize, or they are saying that it could end up hurting them in the future. Because I mean, these big EU automakers, they are also selling their cars in China, and they are really doing good in terms of sales there, and therefore if them trying to hurt Chinese company when they sell their cars in Europe, it won't be that good, because at the end of the day, China will also be forced to retaliate, and that of course will hurt the sales or the revenues that these companies are generating from selling their cars in China. So yeah, man, I believe that though we have not really received more news on EU tariffs, but as it stands, I think it is still good. These companies are still selling very well. I mean, there are companies or Chinese EV makers or Chinese automakers that are planning to really dominate EU by 2030. I mean, BYD is one of the companies that said that by 2030 they believe that they will be the company that is selling most vehicles in Europe, which is something that shows you of the kind of plans that the Chinese automakers or the Chinese EV players are planning about Europe. I mean, NIO, you know that they launched their sub-brand, which is cheaper than NIO, and therefore it means that it can be afforded by quite a number of people, even in Europe, which is something that will be a game changer. NIO also plans to launch yet another, of course, a sub-brand with codenamed Firefly, which that one will even be much cheaper, because whilst Onvo is around 219,000 RMB, Firefly is expected to range somewhere between 100 and 200,000 RMB, which means that that car will be so cheap, and NIO's primary target for that car is Europe. And knowing NIO, ladies and gents, that EV, when they launch it, it will also be eligible for battery swapping, which therefore will mean that people could even end up buying that second sub brand of NIO by less than 100,000 RMB, which is something that of course just has to show you the potential that it lies within the NIO stocks. So NIO is still confident about Europe, which is why they are continuing building and opening NIO houses. Currently, like I said, there are 7 NIO houses in Europe, and they just opened the largest one in Netherlands, which is something that of course I hope it brings more sales into Europe. You'll know that in Europe you can either buy the NIO car cash or go on a lease plan where you lease the car instead of you buying the car, which is something that I think it is also of course pretty good, because it enables people to obviously drive the NIO cars maybe at a cheaper monthly rate or at a cheaper monthly subscription, which is something that is pretty exciting. Otherwise, that's all from me, and I wish you nothing but the best in your stock market investing journey. And before you buy NIO for the very first time, do your own DD so that at least you can be comfortable as you are investing into this stock. Otherwise, that's all from me, and God bless you all.